Hey y'all, it's me Tiffany and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I have been doing kind of a video series where I read 4 books from a given decade. I've done 1900s, 1910s, 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and now this one is the 1950s. So I'm doing something a little different than the past ones on this one. I've done 4 for each of them up to this point. I did 5 just because I found 5 books from the 1950s I wanted to read like now, and I couldn't pick which one to drop to make the video for, so I went ahead and read all 5. They're all relatively short, and one of them, it's hard to really say much about it because of the way the book is written and the context of the book, so it works out either way. So let's jump into it. You have been my friend, and that self is a tremendous thing. I wove my weave for you because I liked you. After all, what is a life anyways? We're born, we live a little, and we die. That isn't the whole quote, but that is a quote I really liked. And The Charlotte's Web. I have seen the movie when I was a kid, but I remembered basically nothing about it except for there was a fair, and obviously I remember like there was a web with words, but I couldn't even remember what the words were. Like, I literally just remember, hey, I seen this movie at some point. And it was like the animated version. I didn't even realize there was a live action one that was made with like Dakota Fanning. Because like when I was looking this book up to read it, because I was curious if there was anything problematic in it. Because if you see my other videos, somehow I keep getting really troubling children's books. And, you know, I was like, there's a couple of movies on this. So Wilmer was born a runt, and the farmer wanted to basically axe him, but Fern, the little girl, was like, no, save him, blah, 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 blah. And then he gets moved to another farm, and Wilmer's eating all this food, getting all fat. Then he realizes, because somebody else tells him, they're fattening you up to eat you. And he becomes friends with the spider, and she basically comes up with a way to keep him alive by making him kind of remarkable, so he would go to a fair or get attention instead of just, you know, literally be fed to become a Christmas dinner. This is a story about friendship, sacrifice. There is some humor. There's a lot of sadness in it. I know stories for kids used to be more about teaching a lesson and stuff. You can see that with like the Grimm fairy tales and with other books. And I think this book was mostly just showing kind of like a circle of life thing, which I'm very conflicted on if I like the circle of life thing, because I don't hate it as a concept, you know, like it is an important lesson, is a thing to acknowledge. I don't mind there being death in my like movies, my books, what have you, but I don't know if I like it like this simplistic. I don't know if I like it this simplistic, because like it's literally like, oh, you're born, you're literally doing nothing till something's ready to take you. And you know, like, I know it's animals, so they can't go on as many adventures, which, you know, they have the fair and all that. But this book was actually pretty depressing. Like, I did not expect to read a children's book where our main character is begging not to die. Like, Wilmer actually begs not to die. I was just feeling dread the entire time, which I knew the spider died and all that, which I didn't expect to get attached to in the short story, but I don't know if it's just the way it was written, you couldn't help but get attached. And it's just really bleak, especially for a kid's book, but at the same time, I don't think it's so overly bleak that it would like traumatize a child. But if you do let your kid read this, they're probably going to come to you crying. The writing is very simplistic, it's easy to understand, like all the themes are just easy, in your face, you know exactly what everything is talking about. I don't think this book is actually just for kids. Like, I think parents and stuff can get some stuff out of it, or adults. They can enjoy the read. And, you know, it makes you think about things, it makes you think about life, and even though this is just like a farm life, like the way Wilmer just kind of sits there and just waits for things to happen and has friends save him, it kind of makes you think a little bit like, what am I doing with my life, you know? So I'm not sure if I would say I liked this because it is rather sad. There are some illustrations in this and they're pretty nice, but I'm not sure I'd say I would like this, but I do think this is a very well written book. And it definitely makes you think, and it does hit on harder topics. And I do think it's kind of good in this kind of way to, if your child or a younger person can handle these themes at the current maturity at the time of they picking up this book, I don't think this is a bad way to introduce and have those conversations. But I would, you know, but I don't mind death being thrown at me. I like to read horror stuff, I play a lot of games, but I kind of like fictional deaths or deaths that seem kind of like sudden or even natural, like homegoing and stuff like that. You know, you go through generations, so you know each character's going to die until you get to each generation, even though you don't exactly see the death scene. And I'm not sure if that's a circle of life necessarily, but in a way it kind of is, you know, because you keep going generation and your family lives on, so it's like a legacy thing. But when it's just so simple and just in your face and you have to think about it, yeah. But this is good, this is very well written. So I see why this is a classic, but I can see why kids would get angry at you for this. A man can be destroyed, but not defeated. The Old Man in the Sea. This is a small little novella. I have heard of this before, and I've definitely seen the book with like a different cover in places, but I never picked it up myself. I knew nothing about it except for I assumed it has something to do with fishing because the other covers I've seen have been like an old man in a fishing boat. I've never read Ernest Hemingway. I knew nothing about his writing style. I know he is considered a great and a classic. I've heard he was a bit of a jerk, like a major jerk, and there were some things in his life that weren't great, but I don't know the little details of it. I've never been exposed to his writing. I heard this is a lot different than his other stuff because it's so short, but I'm not sure. Haven't read it. So we basically follow this old man who is known to be a fisherman, and his luck runs out, and he wants to go on this great big fishing trip, and he gets his eyes set on a huge fish, and he basically stays out all night and off like the coast of Havana in Cuba, and you know, he has his little, I'm not sure what you would call it. It's kind of like, it's not his godson and it's not really his nephew, but you get that vibe, like this is like a nephew, uncle, godfather, godson relationship, and it's nice. Like this boy who has gone fishing with him, who has moved on to other boats, still comes check up on this old man, and you can tell this old man is elderly, and you know, all he cares about is the baseball and the fishing and just his little routines. And this is a very slice of life thing that has just like a huge moment in this old man's life in it. You know, like there's not a whole lot of characters, there's not a whole lot of different scenes, which this is not even 100 pages. This is, oh, never mind. It's 110 pages. I lied. And it's very quick. The language is very simple. It's easy to read in one sitting. There's nothing complicated really about it at all. But the messages are very clear and in your face. Like this is kind of like a morality tale of like finish what you start. Like, and he did finish what he started or tried to. And then it also, because of the ending, it's like just because you worked hard and you did everything right, life can literally bite you in the butt and you get nothing for all you worked for. And that's pretty bleak as well, even though that is a very true lessons. Sometimes you get rewarded, and sometimes you get nothing for all that you worked for. And that's kind of what you get out of this. I really like seeing stories from elderly points of view. I know I said it was Charlotte's Web. I don't really like the Circle of Life thing, which that's not what this is. You do not see a whole cycle of this man's life. But I do like seeing like snippets of elderly people because they have a story to tell. They have more wisdom usually. Or even if their body starts giving away and they can't give you that wisdom, it's just like we always focus on young people, so I do like seeing things from an older person's point of view. And yeah, if you want a quick read to see if you like Hemingway, I guess this is it. I'm not sure how this compares to his other stuff, but I did like it. I'm not sure if I'd say this is like one of the top 100 books you should read in your lifetime, but I do think if you want a decent novella, this is it. What are we? Humans, animals, or savages? I am talking about Lord of the Flies. I know at least in the US, or at least like where I'm from in the US, this is a very common book for required reading in high school. I was not required to read this. There was some English classes in my high school that were, but I was not in that class. I've heard of this book. I knew that it was like a bunch of boys stuck on an island and there was some death. But that's all I knew. This was the thickest book I've read of the bunch. I absolutely love this color. It's super grotesque. Like, I actually bought some classic books recently that were used, and I almost bought this instead of going to the library, but I've heard so many people saying, like, while this is an important and a well-written read, a lot of people were like, ugh. So I decided, and like, this is a relatively new Penguin edition, and I couldn't find it at the price I wanted to pay. So I was like, I can read it first, and if I like it, I can add it to my collection. Because when classics kind of have this look where it's like kind of gory, or like some of the gothic ones, I want them. So the plot is a bunch of boys get stranded from a plane crash on an island, and there is a conflict between two of the boys. One wants to hunt, one wants to build shelter, and then people get scared of this beast thing and they turn on each other and they go very chaotic. So as I mentioned, the hunting and the shelter group, they form two bigger groups, and they argue about who's contributing more than the other because one feels like they're doing more work, which both things would be essential things to do if you're stuck on an island, And there's a lot of bullying, and one of the kids die, and this is basically like, what would society be at its core? But I guess it would be, what would society be at its core if you left a bunch of children alone with no girls involved? Like, I mean, I'm sure a bunch of men or a bunch of women would act different if they were left alone as adults without one another and no kids involved. And so I'm sure kids would be the same if you divide them up. I'm not sure if it always would go this bleak. The only story I really read that was similar to that, and it was like a true story, and it was about this rugby team in Uruguay, and they got lost in like the Andes Mountains, and they did go cannibalistic. It was called like Out of the Silence, or the book was called Out of the Silence, and it was a tremendous tale. They were very, very organized, but they were older than these kids. They were also on a team. They got stuck with people who weren't part of the rugby team as too, because it was a plane crash. But they were stuck on those mountains in the snow, and they handled things a lot better, and that's a real life example. But this was like after this book was written, so but I'm sure some people would go feral, and some people would bully each other, and groups of people do condone bullying against other groups occasionally, and there's a lot of symbolism in this. Saying that, I do think this is thought-provoking. I do think it's okayly written. I tried this physically, could not stand it. The audiobook did not really make it better. It was just slightly better because I could at least listen to it while I clean versus being like looking at it and just my mind drift away and away and away. Would I recommend this? If you need if you need something that was going to make you think and you do like seeing society just being horrible, or maybe if you're an English major, because I do see other things that's been inspired off this, like it's clicking, I'm like, this is kind of like where that came from. But I did not enjoy it. I thought it was dull. I almost just straight up DNF'd it, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to just see this through. I kind of wish I did it. So this next one I do not have a quote, and I really can't talk about it much because of the type of book it is and the nature. I was unsure whether to add this to the list, but it is an important American history book, and I think it should be talked about. And maybe you're not into rituals or religious practices and stuff, or maybe you are, or maybe you're just a history buff and you might like to know this is on your radar. This is more of a reference book, or if you're just trying to learn more about Lakota and different Native American religions. Not all Native American tribes worship the same religions or do the same things. They are not a monolith. Their customs and everything can be completely different than another tribe. Some stuff may overlap, just like any other groups of people sharing a continent. So the Sacred Pipe, Black Elk basically tells the 7 rites of the Sacred Pipe and his religion to Joseph Brown, and it was a very interesting read. This is not a light read by any means, and you can definitely tell this is an older book, because one thing I will say that is good is there are plenty of footnotes, because I'll be honest, most of us aren't familiar with this particular religion or many things to do with like Lakota, right? And there's a lot of footnotes which give a lot of cultural context and a lot more explanation. Some pages, like there's like one page in here, I didn't keep up with the number. Like the first paragraph was new information, and then the rest was footnotes. And there's not a whole lot to it, I guess, as far as the actual rituals and stuff themselves, or just saying about the 7 rites through it. But it makes up a lot for cultural context, and when I saw this, I actually didn't really know this is exactly what I was getting, but I knew it was going to be a historical thing about a religion, and that intrigued me a lot because I haven't seen other books really like this. There might be for other tribes and other religions that aren't like the top 5 religions, but this intrigued me. I did enjoy reading this. I read this for the historical context of it, and this is something you read a little bit at a time. You're not going to sit down and read this in one sitting, or at least I didn't. But I'm basically mentioning this here, that this book is a great like American read, and if you want to know more about them, then here you go. So I forgot to mention this while I was talking about this. I hope I'm saying this right. I YouTubed the word, and this is what it sounded like to me, but I have nobody to correct me here, so I'm really trying to be respectful and say things right. But Oglala, that is a sub-tribe of the Dakota. Like, there's different tribes that kind of get grouped together as one, so this is definitely not like a religion that encompasses all of Lakota. There are sub-tribes, and when you actually start looking into it, there's a lot more than meets the eye. Not everybody is just all one group. And a lot of Native American tribes that are recognized are several tribes that kind of get grouped up as to one because of the way our government is. But yeah, I wanted to mention that because I just noticed I didn't say that before I went on to the next book, and I think it's important to mention that if you're going to be talking about this in particular. And perhaps the first time in my life, death came to me as a reality. Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin. So this is a queer classic, and it's not very long. I enjoyed this, but there was some issues I did have, but the writing is absolutely gorgeous, and I still enjoyed it all the same, but with problematic things, you do need to talk about them. There is a lot of misogyny in this. The way I kind of read this is I think he kind of used the way like women were talked about and how they're seen as weaker in certain things, and he kind of talks about like gender roles and all that stuff in a way that's definitely not accepted in 2021 a little bit. But this was written in the 50s, and like for example, there was literally a quote saying, "There's a bunch of women running around today full of ideas and thinking themselves equal to men. They need to be beaten to death to discover who rules the world." I butchered that quote a little bit, but that last sentence was exact, and I was just like, ugh, you know, like, we do not like that mindset. But when you take out the misogyny, I do like this a lot. But if you're sensitive to self-hate, this may not be for you, but this is a queer classic for a reason, and I definitely think it shows values of the time as well. Our main character, Dave, meets Giovanni, an Italian bartender, and they have a homosexual affair. And he's with a girl named Hella, and we don't really see how this relationship developed and became to be, but you could definitely tell Dave is gay and not into this, and there's a little bit of misogyny thrown her way. And Dave wants normalcy and to blend in with society, and honestly having this homosexual affair is dangerous in the 1950s, but it's exciting for him, and he's basically like, they're drawn to each other a lot. I think the characters felt realistic for the time frame this was written. Obviously, I wasn't born in the 1950s, but what I've read and seen and know of the 1950s, everybody feels pretty authentic. And I kind of feel bad for like everybody involved, because they're just, this is claustrophobic and full of doom, and you're a little bit of nervous in this. Like, honestly, I think everything I read is giving me doom except for the last book I talked about, The Sacred Pipe. And there's just a whole lot going on, and because there's a lot of self-hate and stuff, there's like, you know, he's having to deal with all that, so there's like a lot of emotions, and sometimes he acts out a bit, and it all feels realistic. And once I started this book, I could not put it down. The prose is beautiful. I love the way this man writes. James Baldwin was actually gay himself, if you know nothing about him. He was also African American, and I've heard all of his books are fantastic, and I definitely want to read more of them. And I like seeing this view of what feels pretty authentic for a time where you definitely had to hide the fact that you were gay. And some of the stuff in here is not easy topics, but I do think, or I totally understand why this is a queer classic. I enjoyed this so much. Okay guys, that is it. So those are the 5 books that I read. If you enjoyed any of these books yourself, let me know in the comment section below, or you hated them. If there's any books from any decade that I should get to next, from like the 60s through the 90s, let me know, and maybe I'll get to them. I'll see you later. Bye!